And welcome to the Tuesday, October 13 meeting of the work session of the Ann Arbor City Council. Our work session tonight is the Joint City Downtown Development Authority, DDA, annual work session, and a update from the Ann Arbor Housing Commission. Ms. Play.
Okay, well, thank you all.
Excuse me, are we doing a roll call or approval of the agenda per the agenda?
The council rules do not provide for those things. They are, I'm referring to 5A, which has the agenda for the work session as the call to order, work session, public commentary, and adjournment.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I'm just looking at my agenda.
No, that is a published agenda which is going to be revised. I'm referring to the council rule 5A.
Okay, I will bring that up.
No worries.
So again, my name is Susan Pauley, and I'm the Executive Director of the DDA. And with me are several members of the DDA board. I haven't looked the last second, but I know we've got Tyler Kinley, Marie Clough, Tom Crawford, Jessica Letow, Molly McFarland, Darren McKinnon, and other DDA members who may have just joined. Tonight, I also have with me my colleague Sarah McCallum, who's our Accounting Manager and Deputy Director, Jada Halbrock, who's the DDA Parking Services Manager, and Maura Thompson, who's our DDA Communications Manager. Tonight's work session comes as a requirement from the City DDA Parking Agreement, which sets forward that City Council shall designate one working session in the fall of each calendar year as a joint working session with the DDA to talk about parking. And as always, there is a lot to talk about with parking, but the big focus this year and what we're going to focus on in our presentation is the COVID impacts to the parking system and the strategies that DDA is employing to contain our costs. We're going to give you a short presentation and we're going to follow it with questions. But I want to lead off by just saying that the DDA in all things continues to use its development plan as we shape our decisions, even with the COVID pandemic shaping a new reality. DDA is monitoring revenues and managing expenses very closely. And to tee us off, I'm going to start by asking my colleague Sarah McCallum to talk with us about the parking revenues.
Good evening, everyone. Sarah here. Just a note before I begin about questions. We'll be covering quite a bit of information tonight, so we thought it best that we save questions for the end of the presentation. And I will start by reviewing an overview of fiscal year 20 budget to actual. Quick orientation for how the information on this slide is organized. Vertically, you'll note there are three sections: blue, orange, and gray for revenues, expenditures, and fund balance. You'll find this color coding to be fairly consistent throughout the presentation. Horizontally then, the columns start on the left with fiscal year 18 and 19 actual activities, which are included for reference. And then the big red arrows point to the fiscal year 20 budget and actual, and we finish on the right with some information about the variance between those two columns. Revenues for fiscal year 20 were budgeted at 23 million. Actual came in at 19.5, which is 3.6 million or 16% under budget. This is, of course, due to the impacts of the pandemic and the resulting shutdowns that occurred mid-March and continued through mid-June. Prior to that period, revenues had been up. At the end of February, they were up by 1 million, which somewhat helped to soften the losses we experienced during the fourth quarter. When revenues for April through June dropped to 35% of their budgeted levels. And that 35% was almost entirely comprised of permit fees. Meter and hourly fees dropped to single digits during this period. On the expenditure side, expenditures were budgeted at 22.6 million and came in at 18.3, which is 4.3 million or 19% under budget. Almost 1 million of this reduction is tied directly to revenue losses. The city's 20% payment and credit card charges are both calculated or based on revenue streams. So when the revenues decrease, those expenditures automatically decreased as well. But for capital improvements, operations, and administration, those expenditures were somewhat under budget going into the fourth quarter when further reductions were implemented by the DDA in response to the revenue losses and to try to contain those. Fund balance, that response on the expenditure side allowed us to end fiscal year 20 with a net position that was up from the previous year. We ended fiscal year 19 with a fund balance of 11.8 million, and fiscal year 20, the parking system fund balance was 13 million, an increase over the previous year of 1.2 million. Next slide, Kelly. Now we'll move on to fiscal year 21, and we'll start by taking a look at parking fees for July and August compared to that same period last year. I'd like to direct your attention to that table at the bottom of the screen. Here you can see that fiscal year 20 parking fees for the first 2 months of the year averaged about 2 million per month. This year, the parking fees averaged more like 1.1 million, so a reduction of 44%. This is in line with the optimistic projections, revenue projections for fiscal year 21 that were calculated in April. But those projections called for a bump in the revenues later in the year, which for our purposes going forward has been leveled off in those more recent projections and the ones that are shown in the rest of this presentation. So this lower level of projected revenue is a bit more conservative, and we feel more comfortable with these numbers at this time. The graph portion of this slide, you can see, the July and August on the left side for last year, and to the right, July and August for the current year. The columns, of course, illustrate the difference in how the three different fee sources have been impacted. Dark blue, that's the on-street meters. Gray is the hourly fees in the structures, and light blue, the permits. Meters on street and then the hourly both suffered losses in the 60% range, with permits faring better. Permits had a loss of about 13%. Now we'll pivot to expenditures for fiscal year 21. Start by looking at the expenditures as budgeted. Something to note here is that there are varying degrees to which we can affect or control these different cost categories. So at the top there you see our debt service, about 2.7 million. We have little to no ability to reduce that, of course. Refinancing, of course, we could spread it out farther, but it's not something easily done. The next two categories, so the city 20% fees and the credit card fees at 5 million and 1.5 million respectively. Those again are based on revenues, so they automatically adjust. Capital improvements at 10.4 million. That's the category we have the most control over because we can adjust that both in scale and in timing by pushing those out to further years. And then ops and administration at 9.8 and 1.8. We have moderate control over those. Again, we can adjust the scale, but not so much the timing. Next, Kelly. So this is the same information that you just saw on that previous slide. Here graphically represented, which I think better illustrates the scale of those various categories. So you can see debt service is quite small, about 9%. The yellow then is the city, and the 20% in the credit card charges, which automatically are adjusted as revenues go up or down. Then that next, the biggest section there is capital improvements, the amber color, 33% of total expenditures as budgeted, with the highest degree of adjustability. And then the deeper orange, operations and administration, about 37% altogether, with that but more moderate ability to adjust those. And now I'll hand this over to my colleague, Jada Hallbrock, and she'll walk us through some detail on these expenditures and what our kind of first blush pandemic response looks like on the expenditure side.
Hello, this is Jada. So this slide shows a breakdown of the capital expenditures as budgeted for fiscal year 21. Restoration and maintenance work in the facilities is about 1/3 of the expenditures, but there was also money allocated for equipment, repairs, and studies. We also anticipated spending based on the outcomes of a couple studies, a light study, and an electric vehicle charging station study. These funds were intended to be spent in support of the city's carbon neutrality goals. As we move through the next several slides, I'll show you where our expenditure plan is different than budgeted amounts. So annually, the DDA undertakes work based on a 20-year plan of repairs recommended by engineers. The fiscal year work was budgeted for $3.1 million. I worked closely with engineers to review the proposed scope of the work and to identify which elements were urgent and which we could delay. The adjustment is about $1.8 million. However, it's important to remember that this is a deferment of expenditures and not an elimination. This work will still need to be done. We are just prioritizing and choosing to tackle only the most critical elements this year. The DDA has had a strong and really proactive structural maintenance plan for many years, and this good work has allowed us to have a little bit of breathing room in this year in particular. Work this year includes waterproofing and concrete repairs at Maynard, Ann Ashley, Library Lane, and Forest, some coating repairs at 4th and William, and a stair replacement project at the Southeast Stair Tower at 4th and Washington. I will also work with our elevator contract to identify priority repairs for fiscal year 21. A majority of the work this year for elevators is at Ann Ashley. It was anticipated that some of this work would have been undertaken as part of the expansion project. That project is not moving forward, but the work still needs to be done. There is also important work that we are completing at 4th and Washington. This 4th and Washington facility has only one elevator, and for some time it's had recurring issues related to the door hardware. So that's something we're accomplishing at the same time as the stair project. Last fall, staff went through a robust process for selecting new parking equipment, and in January, the DDA board approved the purchase and established a project budget. Bids were lower than what had been anticipated and budgeted for. This equipment is essential to the operation of the system. With the exception of the 4th and William structure, the current equipment ranges from 7 to 14 years old, with many components just not being supported any longer by the manufacturer. Best practice in the parking industry is equipment replacement every 7 years or so. Again, this equipment purchase includes hardware and software necessary for the operation of the system, so this spending could not be deferred or eliminated. For fencing, for the past few years, the DDA has budgeted funds for fall deterrent fencing at the structures. We have made very good progress. Remaining work is below rooftop level fencing at the Forest structure. The work at Forest is being designed currently, and we will bid this project this fall. So we're opting to keep the funding as is until we know more about costs. In fiscal year 21, staff plan to study certain components of the parking system as a way to inform next steps in support of the city's carbon neutrality plan. We are still hoping to move forward with a lighting study. This study would include an inventory and analysis of existing lighting infrastructure and recommendations for improvements to fixtures, bulb types, sensor equipment, and so on. While we don't yet have a cost for this work or for this study, we're estimating $20,000. This is important information to have ahead of any repairs or replacements of lighting infrastructure, given the large number of lights across the parking system. The curb management study has been deferred. A measurement of uses is an important part of this study, and this period of disruption is likely not the best time to measure how people use the curb in a regular way. However, it is still important work. We continue to refine what the study will look like, and staff is working to have an RFQ ready to go when it makes sense. We are electing to defer spending around electric vehicle and carbon neutrality for the time being. However, we do remain committed to these goals, and we will work to weave those elements back in as spending priorities as soon as possible. We are working closely with the city's sustainability office as we develop a plan to expand the infrastructure around electric vehicle charging in the public parking system. We are keeping some dollars for software and basic system repairs, and we have elected to eliminate the dollars previously budgeted for a build out at the operator's business office. So this slide pulls together all of the originally budgeted amounts, the adjustments, either reductions or deferrals, and our adjusted activities. So adjusted activities are kind of what we are framing as our new expenditure plan, an overall reduction of 6.7 million, or 63% of the CIP expenditures. So if you recall the pie chart that Sarah shared earlier in this presentation, operational expenditures account for, if you will, the second third of the budget, of the parking budget. And this includes parking operator and DDA expenditures. On the operator side, reductions have been made to personnel costs that result in about a 30% reduction. The cuts were made based on a recognition of the fact that there's likely to be reduced parking demand for quite some time. There was a reorganization of shifts and schedules in order to match this expected demand. Republic Parking has also been asked to cut their administrative, maintenance, and subcontractor costs by 20%. Since mid-March, basically all non-critical expenditures and repairs have been put on hold. While major system repairs are paid for from the DDA CIP fund, less expensive structural and mechanical repairs are paid for from the RPS maintenance budget. Moving forward, we'll redouble our efforts and work closely with RPS to make sure maintenance expenditures of all sizes are in line with our budget priorities and the 20-year repair plan. It's important to remember that while some of these costs can be reduced in the short term, they will need to be addressed at some point. Although they are counted for here in the operations budget, it is reasonable to consider some of this 20% reduction as a deferment, much like we do on the capital side. I'll now turn the presentation back to Sarah.
So thinking back again to that pie chart, the administration cost is a small piece, the smallest piece of the overall expenses at 6%. But we were able to find some cost reductions there nonetheless. Personnel contingency was reduced by 50%. Other personnel costs, which includes training and temporary employees, that was reduced by 25%, as was grants. That's primarily due to GoPass reductions and their reduced usage. Professional services and miscellaneous were both reduced by 20%. The overall potential adjustment here is a little over 300,000, which is 18% of the total expenditures in this category. And here we're pulling everything together for fiscal year 21. Revenues budgeted at 25 million, projected at 13 million, 53% of budgeted levels. Expenditures are budgeted at 31.7 million, projected here at 19.2, 60% of budgeted levels. And the fund balance. The parking system ended fiscal year 20 with 13 million in fund balance. At the end of fiscal year 21, that is projected to drop to 7.2 million, which puts us in a better position than the budget called for, but without the benefit of all the capital improvement items that had been planned. So we do expect that fiscal year 21 will represent the parking system's most challenging year, followed by a slow and protracted recovery period. And we'll take a quick look at the first couple of years of what that might look like. This table contains 3 years of actual activity, 18, 19, and 20. And then it shows 3 years of projected activity through fiscal year 23. For revenues, we talked about what parking fees looked like for the first 2 months of the year. And we talked about the leveling off of those optimistic projections that were done earlier this spring. You recall that 13.3 million that you see for fiscal year 21 is then a more conservative projection than what we were looking at earlier. Fiscal year 22 and 23 here are showing an increase of 20% per year on that 13.3 base. So normally, when presenting projections, this is the point at which the basis of the projection might be identified. Financial models are, typically based on history and benchmarks and good things like that, which we just don't have here. We don't have previous global pandemics to base these numbers on. So please note that while it's always a good idea to take projections with a grain of salt, keep in mind that these numbers, all the more so, we just don't have much to go on here. On the expenditure side, disclaimers, back up, Kelly. Thank you. Disclaimers are warranted on the expenditure side as well. Fiscal year 21, as shown here, is that level of service that Jada just went through. As noted, we consider these numbers to be a starting point. We're going to continue to monitor revenues. We're going to continue to look for ways to keep those costs down as we go forward. But for fiscal year 22 and 23 here, those expenditure numbers that you're seeing at 19.5 million do not represent a plan. They don't represent a recommendation. They're simply provided as a frame of reference to illustrate what fund balance might look like if we maintain the current level of service and maintenance. To get a sense, basically, at that bottom line, fund balance. And it does not paint a pretty picture. Fund balances at 6/30/20 are 67% of revenues. And you can see they drop each year. At 6/30/23, fund balance is projected to be 3.6 million, only 19% of those revenues. And just a quick caveat, that bottom ratio is calculated fund balance as a percentage of revenue. This quick kind of ratio thing is a common way of analyzing fund balances. Sometimes it's calculated on revenues, sometimes on expenditures. Both are, common approaches to doing that. For the parking system, I tend to go with revenues because in a fund that has significant levels of one-time expenses, high levels of capital improvements and such, revenues tend to be the steadier number, which gives a better indication of the trend. But after this presentation was submitted for the meeting tonight, I realized that expenditures might actually have been preferable in this case, as they are the steadier number of the two. That would have shown a more significant drop for 21 and 22 in those percentages. But the effects level off for 23 when the gap closes between revenues and expenditures and our projections. I just wanted to note that it was not an intentional attempt to make those numbers look better. Probably most people wouldn't have thought of it, but I know Tom would, so mentioning it anyway. On to that next slide then, Kelly. So the same numbers that you just saw are here. Again, more of a graphic representation. Blue represents the revenues, orange, the expenditures, and you've got some actual at the beginning and then the projected going out. That gray line then shows the projected levels of fund balance and how those drop over that time. And I think this makes it really clear that the current levels of expenditures are not sustainable, those levels at least as projected there, in this revenue environment. And, you know, the operating committee has begun discussing the need to establish minimum fund balance levels that are appropriate for this situation, this new situation that we find ourselves in. And that's something we're going to be working on over the coming months. That will likely drive a further look at those expenditure curtailments as we continue to monitor the revenue levels as well going forward. So now I'll turn this over to Maura Thompson. She's going to walk us through some of the COVID support efforts that the DDA has made over the last 6 months.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everybody. It's Maura. Like Sarah said, I'm going to walk us through some of the DDA's COVID response strategies. And these are strategies that are directly related to the parking system. So this isn't everything that the DDA has done since March. But back in March, the DDA staff worked with Republic Parking staff to convert over 150 parking spaces into curbside carryout spots. This was an evolving process. We worked with the merchant associations and directly with many of the businesses to respond to the needs of the businesses as things just kept changing. And just to note, you know, when it was March 16th when DDA and Republic Parking staff were running around early one morning, getting these bags on because we wanted to do it really quickly because we thought they would only be on for about 2 to 3 weeks. So just like all of you, you know, unfortunately that was not the case. We also established a parking space repurposing program to allow businesses to expand patios and retail space into adjacent parking spaces. We've had about 30 businesses that have taken advantage of this program, which represents about 50 parking spots. The businesses who participated in this program also had to have a sidewalk occupancy permit to use this program. And just to note that the DDA covered all of the city expenses related to sidewalk occupancy permits for every downtown business that wanted a permit. We also funded the weekend street closure programs, which many of you I know are very familiar with. But in addition to the funding, we're providing all of the necessary management of the meter bags. So every weekend, our partners at Republic Parking have to go out and bag all of the spaces. And they also have to relocate a lot of those curbside carryout spaces because a lot of the businesses who are within a street closure are still relying on that carryout business. So that's something that we continue to manage that. Yep, next slide. All of the monthly parking permit holders received a one-time credit equivalent to the cost of one permit. The DDA board also voted to, we waived all penalties and late fees from March to June on all unpaid and late accounts. And also in July, Republic Parking staff began reaching out to all of the past due account holders to arrange payment plans for those that still wanted to keep their permits but weren't able to pay in full at that time. Also worth noting, in July, there was a pre-approved system-wide parking rate increase, which the DDA board also voted to delay, so that did not take place. And now, Jennifer, I know we'll be talking a lot more about parking lots in your next agenda topic of affordable housing. So I think this might be a good time for us to stop and take any of the questions you may have.
I think Councilmember Omlai. You're on mute, Councilmember. Still on mute. There you go. Oh, no, you're not. I'm sorry. Can anybody else hear him, or is it just me? Councilmember Bannister.
Okay, thank you, Mayor Taylor. I had two questions. Residents want to help the city with performance metrics. And we have scoured through tonight's slides and the state of the downtown report and the city's adopted fiscal year budget for 21 that talks about $57 million in expenditures at the DDA. And what we're trying to drill down and help, does the DDA have performance metrics relative to SMART goals and targets?
Thank you for sending those questions to us a little while ago. Councilmember Bannister, I don't know what SMART stands for. Is that a governmental measurement? Is that a business? I'm not familiar with SMART. You spoke to targets, goals, leading and lagging indicators. I'm not aware of that with regard to governmental entities. Maybe if you could share a little, can you explain how that's used?
Yes. Well, in a nutshell, they are more just goals and targets of where your mission is, where the DDA's mission is accomplishing. SMART goals are time bound and specific, and so I could rephrase that question. Do we have goals and performance metrics as to whether we are achieving or lagging behind in those goals? And then oftentimes that would include past performance, as many years as we have, and also peers, other DDAs for comparison purposes. Do we do any of those best practices here in town?
Yeah, so maybe just to see, because I still don't know that I understand the framework. I do understand the need for metrics. So an example, let me see if I understand it. When we set to design the 5th and Detroit project, which was a partnership project with the city, the primary goal of the project, in addition to repairing the historic brick streets, was to implement a project that helped us meet the council approved goal of Vision Zero. And we shared with council the before and after metrics of the number of cars that stopped at a crosswalk that connects our only public high school with Carytown shops. And we shared with you that the before stoppage was about 56% or thereabouts. After implementing the change, we documented that the stoppage of vehicles for people in the crosswalk was well into the high 90s. So is this the kind of metric that you're looking for? We also gave information about the amount of stormwater catchment that was going on to help meet our climate action goals, or the LED lights, again, meeting the city Vision Zero, carbon neutrality goals. I guess I'm trying to understand, is that the kind of metrics that we're presenting that are also included in the State of Downtown report? Is that what you are looking for?
That might be a good start, a small piece of it, a template that we could look at. I did look at the State of the Downtown report, and I saw like the list of the projects and how much was spent, but it is more looking at the specific goal, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound on the SMART goals for the whole system in a big picture, where the accessible to the residents, because we have a lot of smart residents who would like to help with performance and tracking performance and management decisions. So yes, that small one project you looked at was a piece of it. they're also interested in sources and uses of cash overall, funds transfers, millages diverted pre-budget, that kind of information we didn't find as we scoured the financial data that is available. And so the big picture on those best practices, it doesn't sound like that you all have a framework yet, but that you would be open to learning more about how you could have performance metrics.
Yeah, I'm very interested to learn more. Is this something that the entire city will be doing as a framework of work? I'm trying to understand SMART as it relates. I'm still, maybe
Yes.
I'm unfamiliar with the terminology and how it is applied. Certainly
Yes.
providing as much metrics as we can, absolutely.
Oh, good. Yes. Well, just a simple internet search for SMART goals. They're specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And yes, this is something that residents want to help track the city. The city, Tom Crawford could probably speak to this, they're doing this. They're trying to get on board to do this. So each department needs to be doing it. And how the residents can help is we can have a little checklist and see if we do have the features of the metrics that we're looking for that I mentioned. So rather than these piecemeal different pieces of things, but we have these various pieces, tonight for the annual meeting, which is, we're talking about, 19 million or so of the picture, and the other pages of the city budget referenced 57 million. So there's different pieces for an annual meeting that would be a little more comprehensive. And then my last question was on the center of the city and the community commons. Does that fit into the DDA's mission in any kind of way that has been identified?
So I can't speak to that specifically. It's not something that was anticipated when the 2002 development plan was amended, but certainly we remain a partner of the city and look forward to working with the city as that project moves forward.
And lastly, is that development plan online anywhere? I did not see it on the DDA website today.
Yes, it's available on the website. As part of our response, I'll include a link as part of our response.
Thank you.
Councilmember Lum.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do have a few questions, but first I want to thank the DDA for all the support that's been provided businesses during the pandemic. The DDA has really stepped up in that regard, and it's obviously been appreciated by our downtown businesses. We've received many emails from businesses that have been very, that have commended the DDA for that support. I also want to thank whoever's responsible for pulling together tonight's presentation. I have to say it's the meatiest, most informative, detailed presentation that I can recall, and so that's appreciated. Obviously, the 900-pound gorilla is the pandemic and its huge impact on parking revenues. And my first question relates to the revenue outlook, and clearly none of us know what fiscal year 22 and 23 will look like. But it's good that you're beginning to plan for that now. And obviously you didn't pull these revenue projections out of the air. I know you said for 22 it rebounds, you project that rebounds 20%, but that's still 30% below pre-pandemic levels. Similarly for 23, you're projecting rebounds 20%, and that's still below pre-pandemic levels by about 15 to 20%. So I'm wondering if you could just share what you're thinking and in more specifically in terms of the outlook for 22 and 23.
Sarah, would you mind fielding that one?
I'd be happy to the extent that I can.
Mm.
So the 20% number was, this was because the city was asking for projections for the 20% payments, and we needed to take those 5 years out. Looking at what we had in the spring, we had in our naive approach to that, we'd actually tried to consider things like U of M going back into class, full-time classes in person and that kind of thing. None of those things seem very possible to predict at this point. Interestingly enough, as much farther along as we are, everything seems more uncertain rather than less. The 20% was just me recognizing that to a certain degree, we have the option of looking at rates as one component. The other component, of course, is usage. So those are the kind of the two things that go into that. And whether we'll get anything close to the 20%, remains to be seen. But it really wasn't any more complex than that. The current year, the fiscal year 21, right now is based on that activity that we've seen for July and August and just kind of carrying that out. It's actually just a little bit more conservative than what July and August came in. So hopefully our actual is going to be a touch above that, fingers crossed. But no, 22 and 23 weren't based on anything very fancy as far as projections go.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. And
you're welcome.
Also related to 22 and 23, you include the projections of 19.5 million in expenditures both years, which would reduce the fund balance a bit under 4 million. And I'm wondering if you can speak a bit to what makes up that baseline spending level of 19.5 million and what you consider the minimum fund balance for the parking fund.
So the 19.5 was rounding up a touch from the fiscal year 21 projections, and those are the numbers that Jada went through in detail. That was cutting capital expenditures back to about 30-ish% of what we had budgeted. So a I don't have the number right in front of me, 3.7 million, something like that. And it would be carrying that level of expenditure for maintenance and capital improvements, and all the same for operations and administration, same for the 20%. It would just kind of carry those right out as a baseline. We know that the expenditures are going to have to be less than that. As far as minimum fund balance goes, I don't have a number at the top of my head. So normally when you set fund balance levels, you consider things like the type of fund it is, what you're doing with that fund. And if the parking system, what you're looking at here is actually both funds combined. What we've presented tonight includes the parking fund, which is basically an operating fund, and then the parking capital improvement fund that we do our high-level maintenance and improvements out of. Because it isn't simply just an operating fund, we tend to keep a higher level of fund balance in there, and it tends to vary a great deal. We do big projects, it goes down, then we save up money. We do that as a way to keep from having to issue debt, because there's such a high cost to doing that, as well as time consuming and all of that kind of thing. So we try to cash fund as much as we can. This is a whole different situation though, when we're talking about high levels of uncertainty and revenue losses that were not anticipated at normally what you want to see is a higher level of fund balance as a percentage of revenues to kind of, bank against that uncertainty. So again, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at the GFOA, Government Finance Officers Association, for some input, looking to see in uncertain, I know they've got some great information out there. They have been responding at the very beginning of the whole pandemic. They started cranking out information like that because so many government units are struggling right now. So I anticipate that within a few months, we'll have something like a target minimum fund balance that we can share, but I do not have that at this time.
Thank you very much. And then just, again, I realize this is a parking discussion tonight, but if you could share with us, later, if you don't have them tonight, so later, your latest projections for the DDA's fiscal year 21 TIF fund. And yeah, I'm sure you don't have that tonight. And then I'll just, yep, sorry.
No, that's fine. No, we haven't looked at the TIF fund, and we'll be doing that in the next couple of months leading into the into budget. But
Okay.
we don't have projections for fiscal year 21 there. I know of nothing on the revenue side that's TIF funding, and it's been very steady. We anticipate that it will be steady, that we won't see big drops in that. On the expenditure side, we anticipate the expenditures to come in low because we've been very conservative in what we've been pushing forward with on the TIF side as well as parking, for the reason that if the parking system, worst case scenario, were to, the debt payments, the TIF fund is actually able to make the debt payments on the parking side. It's the only expenditure that we can fund with TIF dollars. But because the parking system is in the state that it's in, because things are that uncertain, we're being as conservative as we reasonably can on the TIF side as well with expenditures.
Okay. Thank you very much. And then just later, going forward, so I'm not going to be around a whole lot longer, obviously, but with Ms. Polly retiring at the end of the year, if folks on the DDA board could, for council, for the new council and the current council that's continuing, describe the process and timing for naming her replacement. I think that would be of interest. And then just lastly, I'll just say, so yeah, there was this brouhaha last week regarding the DDA. Just a parting comment. I have not supported dissolving the DDA, and I suspect that's true for the council members sitting here tonight. And which is not to say there weren't legitimate concerns and questions, and because there are. And at the top of the list is I think the basic structural question of control over such a large amount of discretionary dollars. The DDA TIF revenue is largely unrestricted, and it's now over $7 million a year. That's a huge amount of discretionary dollars. And so I think the question of whether is it appropriate for an unelected body, not accountable to residents, to have that degree of control and authority is a legitimate question worthy of a robust community debate. So just put that out there. And thank you again very much for the presentation tonight and for all your support for our cat. It's my cat. Our downtown businesses during the pandemic. Thank you.
I've got Councilmember Nelson Griswold, and if I can, I'd like to get this wrapped up by 8 so that we can move on over to Ms. Hall. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you. I just have a super quick question. In the parking revenue losses, I was curious about the 13% loss in permits, revenue related to permits, because I did get a handful of emails about people who were paying for permits and not using them during the pandemic. I was just interested in a conversation about how, did people give up permits? Is that how you had a 13% loss in permits? How did that happen?
So this is Jada speaking. I can try to answer that. So I think some of that loss is that, yes, people did decide to turn in their permits. Some of it was also timing. There were, people who maybe did not pay early on in the pandemic because the DDA board had decided to waive penalties and late fees, who, then have paid since then or entered into a repayment plan with Republic Parking. So I think it's kind of a combination of all of those items.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I was just curious about that because, thank you. That's helpful.
Councilmember Griswold.
I'll just say ditto for what's been said by Councilmember Lum. I would like to thank the DDA for their agility at the beginning of the pandemic back in March, again, when we thought it was going to be a 3-week process. And now it looks like about a 3-year impact. My one concern is the rate that we're spending down our fund balance. And I see that you've taken a number of steps to contain costs, but I just want to raise my concern that we need to get our costs more in line with our revenue. So thanks again.
Excellent. Councilmember Ramlawi, are you back? Hearing none. All right. We'll move on to Ms. Hall and affordable housing. But before we do that, I guess I'd like to express my my true and earnest thanks to DDA staff and volunteer board members. Obviously, the downtown has had a tremendously difficult couple of months, as has had so many of us. But we also can see that the downtown is a particularly resilient place, and in no small part because of the outstanding work done by DDA members, present and past. So truly, thank you for your good work. Ms. Hall, amaze us.
No pressure. Thank you for having me.
Light work for you.
Before DDA board members, if any of them are about to leave the meeting, I want to give a shout out and a thanks for all the support of the DDA board this year. We're going to be talking about a lot of projects that we're working on, and I have a deep bench of supporting partners, most of which are DDA members. So thank you very much for the folks that are here from the DDA board. Although the rest of the world feels like things are shutting, services are decreasing, we are actually probably the busiest we've ever been. In COVID and trying to stabilize our housing, partially because we have additional resources due to COVID that I wish we had had every year. And in a large part because of the many projects that we're working on, looking at redeveloping city-owned sites. So that's actually going to be the bulk of the conversation tonight, a little different than in past years for the work session. And if I could be given control of the screen, I can start the presentation. Jennifer, you should have permission. Okay, let me do that. Are you guys looking at my AAHC updates? Is that what you're looking at? Because I cannot tell. Okay. Thank you, Kathy. First, I'd like to introduce the rest of the team that's here to talk. Actually, they'll be doing a lot more talking than I will be doing. In addition to Susan Polly, Amber Miller, I don't believe I saw that she was here tonight. We've been working very closely with the DDA and Amber Miller on work that they're doing on infrastructure and streets, and trying to combine that with the work that we're doing on the affordable housing sites. I have Alex Huff and Michael Johnson from the Smith Group here, as well as Mark Norman, who's one of our development consultants who's working with the Smith Group. I have Treza Taylor and Damien Farrell from the Damien Farrell Design Group, architects that are going to be talking about a couple of our sites. And then Teresa Gelati from Community Development at the Washtenaw County, as well as Derek Delacour. They're all part of the team that's been spending a lot of time on looking at redevelopment of these sites. So we're going to talk about that first. And then I'll give an update on some projects we have that are under construction and nearly complete. And then I'll talk about some of our other initiatives. But the first thing we're going to go through is talking about where we're at in the process with our current affordable housing public engagement process with the 4 sites in the downtown. And hold on, sorry, try to get this in the screen. And I'm not sure, Alex or Michael, which one of you is taking over from here?
Hey, Jennifer, this is Michael. I can
All
jump in.
Tell me when to change shots.
Sure, you can go to the next slide. You know, as Jennifer alluded to, we're in the context of looking at 4 sites currently. Of course, this follows on the work that was completed with the public engagement process on 350 South 5th and 415 West Washington in the winter of 2019 into the spring of 2020. But the 4 sites that we'll spend most of our time talking about today are 121 East Catherine, 353 South Main, 721 North Main, and then 309 South Ashley. We've noted here 404 to 406 North Ashley, which is the U of M Dental Clinic, is a future consideration as they've chosen to extend their lease, as most of you know. Next slide.
Oh, sorry. This is why PowerPoints are better, I think.
So yeah, we really built on the kind of engagement platform that we started last fall. We've migrated to do this in an all online way, and so we really have about 11 to 12 weeks of engagement that started in earnest last week with a virtual engagement session where folks could enter into a larger group meeting, listen to a presentation, and then self-select which room they would like to talk about some of the different sites. In addition, we have updated the project website, communityengagement.annarbor.com, and then have launched an online survey within the last 2 weeks that now has over 320 individuals have participated in that survey to date in just 2 weeks. And so we're looking forward to continuing to get more and more people to do that. We've also had some focus group meetings, and we'll continue to with some of the various neighborhood groups and business associations. We sent flyers to each resident and business owner within 1,000 feet of each of the sites. So that was over 6,000 flyers that were mailed in addition to the sessions. So the first engagement was October 1st from 6 to 8, and then please continue to tell your constituents to keep the other the other dates on your calendar. So one immediately after the election, the Monday after the election on November 9th, and then December 10th. We have the next session survey will be open through December, and then we'll anticipate a report out either in December or early next year with some of the findings. And so, as we went through last time, a lot of our consideration is about education, both educating kind of our constituents about what what affordable housing means, but also what development means, right? And so some slides about building height and affordability have an impact on affordability considerations, and higher density options do allow for more affordability with less city subsidy, while some of the more medium density options reduces not only the amount of affordable units but may also require more subsidy. These are also very complex downtown sites that we're talking about, and so important to note that there are different ways and different strategies to employ on each of the sites, whether that's commercial space, parking space, residential space, or some mix of those. And then, of course, there are parking considerations for each site. Each site is currently a parking lot, and so whether we choose to continue some portion of parking at the surface on sites as we develop them, consider below grade options, above grade options, or off-site options for parking. And so we use that as kind of the platform to talk then about these specific sites. 121 East Catherine being the first at the corner of 4th and Catherine. It's zone D2, of course, in the Carytown district in Old Fourth Ward. About 16,000 square feet with a floor area ratio allowable at 200% or 400% with the affordable housing premium. Maxes out at 60 feet or 69 feet with that affordable housing premium, and then some street wall requirements. And so we've, both in the survey and then in our engagement session last week, we introduced kind of 4 options, both for the above grade considerations and parking considerations. And those are interchangeable. The option 1 here looked at a 4-story tall building that yielded about between 50 and 60 units. A 5-story option in option 2 that yielded 70 to 80 units, and a 6-story option that yielded 85 to 90 units. All of these, you know, the consideration here was that these would all be affordable units utilizing LIHTC credits and other sources. And then, you know, the ground floor options, again, could be combined with any of those options above, but an option that really maximizes keeping as many surface parking spaces as possible. There are 49 spaces there today. We think a building on top of this site with a small lobby, an elevator, and 2 stair corridors could maintain close to 40 parking spaces at grade, and then we have to consider how to address the kind of urban street condition at 4th and Catherine. There's a second option that leaves a portion of that site for active uses and maintains about 20 to 24 parking spaces accessed off the alley. And then an option that looks at an underground parking structure under just the 4th and Catherine lot, and maintaining retail at the ground floor and then residential above. Just as a note, we've run the numbers for all of these, and that $8 million parking structure underground was not included in any of the numbers that we ran. It doesn't allow any of the deals to really pencil.
Oh, sorry.
So the second site is 353 South Main. This is zone D1, a small site, 7,000 square feet, 700 to 900% floor area ratio with a max building height of 180 feet here. That is unachievable with the size of the site and the floor area ratio requirements. So we looked at 2 options, really the kind of primary driver just being current construction typology. So option 1 maxes out the floor area ratio with a 10-story building, would require a steel frame construction. Option 2 yields about 50 units, about half as many units, and is a 550% floor area ratio, but could be achieved with stick-built construction. Again, both of these considerations would be for all affordable units here. And both considerations look at active uses on the ground floor and removing the surface parking lot. The third site is 721 North Main, which is has a long and storied history in our city here. And I think the pivot on this conversation that we've taken to the public is not looking at the entirety of 721 North Main due to the fact that it sits primarily in the floodway and floodplain, and affordable housing is not an option for that portion that sits in the floodway or floodplain. And so I've chosen to kind of move forward a public conversation about a small piece of this property, one that they're calling, for the purpose of this discussion, 123 West Summit, with access off of Summit, and then working directly with the folks from the Tree Line Conservancy to make sure that the tree line can move through as planned, and still have a parcel likely that could be zoned C1, which is appropriate considering the zoning along Summit, and yielding, based on either an apartment or a townhome style, anywhere from 7 to 19 units here as a potential. And then the final lot that we're working through right now is 309 South Ashley, also zoned D1 in the Main Street district. It's a large site, as you all know, 553,000 square feet, almost an acre. So D1 allows 700 to 900% FAR and a 180 foot building. And a little bit as a departure from the other three sites, we felt that we might not get as far along in this conversation and this kind of initial engagement session with the public. Still felt it was important to have this conversation, but the conversation that we need to have first is, as you can see on the screen, is a conversation about is 309 South Ashley a key downtown parking site, or is it not? Given the high cost of an underground parking structure, the reality is that if this is a key downtown parking site, we may need to consider the option that this would be an above grade parking structure in this site, still allowing ground floor retail on Ashley, and then allowing either a stick built, 6 stories on top of 3 to 4 stories of parking, or a more substantial building on top of that in option 1. And then option 2, if we as a community feel that this maybe isn't a key downtown parking site, and the kind of future parking needs could be accommodated either down the hill or in other places, the opportunities on this site of splitting that block up into smaller developable parcels, or differentiated heights of building, I think is a lot more open. So that's kind of where we're going with that conversation.
Do we want to stop here and see if there's questions about the community engagement piece of it?
I think that'd be great.
Okay.
How much more time do you have on your whole presentation? Because I want to make sure that you get to all of it.
Probably 20 minutes, maybe.
All right, well, that doesn't give us. All right, let's have, if fair enough, let's break it up, but let's keep this question set very tight so we can move on to the next. Councilmember Bannister.
I had a question about if the affordable housing needs supportive services, how does that work on some of these smaller properties? Would that get very costly when there's only 50 or 80 units to have supportive services?
Actually, it's a little bit easier to do supportive services on the smaller sites than on the larger sites, because you have a smaller population that's going to be typically all affordable housing as opposed to a mixed income with hundreds of people, and it gets more challenging to figure out how to provide services that targets some people in the building and not other people in the building. Are all services open to everyone? Then how much do you need? If you have, it's not that people who aren't low income don't also have housing crises that they need to deal with. So it's actually a little easier when it's a smaller parcel. And services are always a challenge on how to pay for them. Obviously, if the affordable housing millage passes in November and it includes services, that works well on any of these sites, but particularly the smaller sites actually.
Seeing other questions, let's roll.
Okay.
Jennifer, do you want me to keep going on
Please.
350 South Fifth?
Yep.
Great.
Go ahead.
So wanted to just update the group here on our progress on the pre-entitlement process for 350 South Fifth. As you see on the screen, this is the version that both the community supported and that the council moved forward to continue with pre-entitlement into this year, and that's what we've been working on. And just a simple aerial view to kind of level set the kind of where we were. This is William Street in the foreground, 5th Street on the right, 4th Street between the 4th and William parking garage and the library, and a building that steps up from William Street from 4 to 13 to 18 stories adjacent to the Blake Transit Center. We've spent I think a fair amount of our time over the last several months working both with the DDA, the city, and the AAATA to really get the ground floor right here. And we're not quite there yet, but I think we've learned a lot. And maybe it's worth sharing with the group all of the things that needs to happen on the ground floor of this key site. And first and foremost, I think it's important that and Jennifer will say this better than I will, but we have to make sure that this building works, right, from a service standpoint, from an affordable housing standpoint, and so and really that has to happen on grade. It cannot happen below grade. It cannot happen above grade. And so, major consideration of making sure that we have a 30-foot service alley for this building, even if the building kind of cantilevers over it. And then the consideration of adding, either temporary or permanent kind of AAATA staging here, whether that happens in a single lane or a double lane, all has a significant impact on the structure above, and adds another public entity to this conversation that we're taking quite seriously here to make sure that that all the needs of the community are met before going out to a developer RFP. So we do meet with the design review board for the first time tomorrow to go through some of these options, and then the intent is to come back to council later this year, early next year, as we've moved through with the kind of preferred option.
And when Michael said services, he didn't mean like social services. He meant like property management services, like literally where do you keep the dumpsters? Where do they get picked up? If somebody has a moving van, where does it pull in? Where do people get their Grubhub deliveries? Like, where are bicycles parked? Like, those are the types of things we're like literally trying to figure out, those kind of specifics, elevators, stairs, those kinds of things.
Yeah. Thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, no problem.
So this is the preferred option with a 30-foot service lane and an option to extend that without significantly impacting the structure of the building for a 45-foot service lane. We are getting some initial cost estimates on both of those options right now, and working with the AAATA to make sure that we're all on the same page. Also, how the building works at William Street and the kind of spaces for tenant amenities and commercial tenants, and then how that's loading and service and trash pickup will work to make sure that we're both activating William Street and making sure the building functions. And then how that impacts then the number of units, the structure of the building above that to still keep the general numbers in line with where we came both to the public and council last year. So these are some of the views as it looks, which, as you can see, hasn't changed considerably at this point. We're trying really hard to keep it this way. And then the last one is 415 West Washington. I don't have much update for this one. Jennifer, I don't know if you do.
Basically, where we're at is the City Council approved moving forward with pre-entitlement, similar to what we're doing at 350 South 5th. And it was contingent on funding from the DDA, and with DDA funding as it is, that is not in the budget for this year, but it's still on the table. If we can secure funding in the future, it's still there and ready to start working on the pre-entitlement process. And it's just a reminder of, what that looked like when we brought it to City Council. And I'm going to stop there for 1 second. And the next part of the presentation is with the Damien Farrell Design Group, who have been working with me on looking at ideas for 2000 South Industrial, as well as 1501 Stadium, which is fire station number 2. Just to remind council, those are one of our main offices in our maintenance area is on industrial. And so we were looking at, is there a way to build both housing and new office/maintenance space at industrial, as well as potentially on stadium, or temporarily move to stadium while we develop industrial. And so they did some architectural and design ideas. I've attached to this work session the full study that was done, and we'll have more discussion later. So we're just going to do a little overview right now. So I'm not sure if Tresna or if Damien's going to be taking it from here.
I'm going to take it just for a moment, and thank you for this terrific opportunity to work with you. These have been some good challenges, and we've really enjoyed it so far. But Tresna is going to lead us through the presentation and through the options that we went through.
Yeah, so the first site that we looked at was the stadium site, which is Ann Arbor Fire Station number 2. It's currently zoned R1C. So it's the surrounding neighborhood is all single family that's to the south and east and north. And then there's a bit of a commercial area at the intersection there. That's Stadium Boulevard and Packard. So that's the site. The first option that Jennifer asked us to look at was to put all of the Housing Commission offices and maintenance facilities on this site. There's a lot of program needs that they required, and we ended up with a 4-story building, and it didn't even provide all of the maintenance facilities that they needed, but this is kind of how that massing and the parking needs laid out on the site. The next option was to take that 4-story building and say, okay, well, what if it's affordable housing instead? How many units would we get? So we ended up with this. This would have to be rezoned, or this would be a PUD. We end up with 23 affordable units, a mix of studios, 1-bedrooms, and 2-bedrooms. Yep, and then the third option we looked at was to redevelop the existing building as affordable housing. And this building would yield 9 units, again, a mix of studios, 1-bedrooms, and 2-bedrooms. One of the nice things about this option is that it would be very accessible. Fourth option that we looked at was kind of taking a blank slate approach to the site and proposing affordable housing. Because we're not in the downtown area, we were looking at more contextual solutions or ways of providing housing. So we decided to go with duplexes. And one of the things that we really wanted to explore with the housing was the use of modular, light frame modular housing. So basically, units are made up of boxes, or a box or a series of boxes that are prefabricated in a factory, finished out inside and outside, trucked to the site. They're kind of plugged together and then kind of patched up, and they're ready to go. So there are advantages with time and with budget by doing this. And so what we came up with was a set of 4 side-by-side duplexes that give you 8 units on this site. And while we like that site, one of the downsides of that site was that because they are, there's 2-story duplexes, so there was an accessibility issue. So this variation on that proposes one of the duplexes to be stacked flats so that the bottom unit of that would be fully accessible. And then we would satisfy the requirements of the Fair Housing Act. So the second site that we looked at, again, was the South Industrial site. And things on this site, there's an existing water tower that was to remain, and also underground gas tanks and gas pumps where city vehicles fill up. The red indicates existing buildings, in most cases to be demolished, which we'll see. So in the first, I guess the overview of the zoning, this is currently zoned public land. And then we would be changing to, in most cases, this would be office zoning, which does permit does permit housing and residential. So the first option that we looked at was to have both the Housing Commission maintenance and administrative facilities in a separate building for affordable housing. So the green mass indicates the office building with a 3-story office building, and then a shed type maintenance building on the south side of the lot. And on the north side of the lot, we get 30 units of affordable housing. So it's basically a bottom, ground level parking podium for the residents, and then 3 levels of housing above that.
And one of the constraints you can kind of see of this site is where those dotted lines are. We're trying to figure out how to make sure we can get large delivery vehicles in and out of the site, as well as maintain the city's gas tanks and EV stations on site, which require a lot of parking and a big turn radius. And so that kind of reduced the amount of space that we could do for housing.
Right. So the second option was to kind of do a mega building where we'd have the affordable housing and housing commission offices in one mega building. So we'd have a podium layer, again, parking podium at the ground level for residents. The second floor of that would be offices for the housing commission. And then we again have 3 stories of housing above that. This scheme has 42 units, a mix of the studios, 1s and 2 bedrooms. And then the maintenance building is still a separate building. It was just really difficult to connect that all on the site. So the last option was to just demolish the Housing Commission office buildings and then build a new building, basically leaving the south end of the site as it is and not incorporating any affordable housing on the site. So we, yep. So we were asked to do a cost analysis on these, each of these schemes. And, you know, it's difficult at this stage, but I think that we came up with a methodology which really is helpful to kind of compare these, each option with each other more than anything else. And then we also analyzed each of the options on the merits of site suitability, environment and sustainability, and also accessibility. And then we have just a summary then of all 8 options that we looked at.
We probably should add that this site would not qualify for LIHTC funding, correct, Jennifer, because of the railway location?
That's correct.
So it would make the financing of affordable housing here a completely different kind of capital stack.
And similarly at Stadium, it doesn't score highly for a tax credit deal. And so both of these sites, again, if the affordable housing millage does pass, these would be two good sites to be able to put some subsidy into the sites to make sure we can do affordable housing there. And to give you an update on Stadium, the county dispatch is moving out of fire station number 1 downtown. It's going to be renovated somewhat, and then the fire station, the fire employees inspector group that's currently at fire station number 2 on Stadium will be moving to fire station number 1. I just spoke to Chief Kennedy today, and he said they thought they'd be out by January of 2022. Which is fine for purposes of our timing on what we would do with that site. And then on industrial, it's mainly the Housing Commission, and then there's lease space to the AAATA for some of their buses that are being maintained, as well as the Water Resource Commission and CTN. There may be another entity that rents space there, and then we have a lot of traffic in and out of the site for fire trucks and police and inspectors using the gas pumps, as well as the new EV stations that they're installing right now. And then the last 2 sites on Platte Road, we have a RFP that we've developed and just haven't quite gotten to the final step in actually issuing it. The RFP would include community engagement with the surrounding community as well as design issues. And I'm not sure when that's going to get issued. Just been had a lot of work on these other sites. So I haven't gotten to that one yet. And wanted to give the neighbors a little bit of a break since we're doing construction right across the street from them right now, which gets us to Swift Lane, which is our last public housing converted into RAD project-based vouchers. We will actually be moving tenants in this month, starting this month, and hopefully be completely filled and occupied by probably January of next year. So we have a really tight schedule of filling these units. So I have just a little bit of information about these sites. We're already getting tenants income qualified. And so one's at State Street, and there's 32 apartments there. And the second one is on Platte Road, also 32 apartments. But more of a family style apartments. And I just have one more slide so I can finish that out, and then we can go to questions if you would like for all of those various activities. The final slide I have is really some of the other major initiatives. Larry Terrace, obviously City Council is familiar with that. Just to give you an update, we are still waiting for HUD approval of the financing. And we have a couple legal issues that we're dealing with Larry Terrace, with really old properties that don't have proper deeds and easements and whatnot that we need to figure out. And then with the CARES Act, we've actually, I kind of mentioned at the beginning, we've actually received more funding this year from HUD than we have probably since our public housing was built in the 1960s. We've had over $1.5 million additional dollars in our Housing Choice Voucher Program. Much of that we've been using because as people lose their income, their portion of the rent decreases, so our portion of the rent increases. And so we don't have people losing their voucher because of us running out of funds. We actually can cover that, and we even have some additional funding to issue new vouchers. We've had, for the first time, enough administrative fees to cover our budget, as well as provide very specific tenant services related to COVID. And we unexpectedly received 41 new vouchers for elderly households with family members with a disability. And we have another year, a little over a year, to expend all of these funds. We won't really know until the federal budget is adopted as to how our funding will look like in the next year, but there's definitely much more discussion and awareness of the need for affordable housing and eviction prevention, on all spectrums of the political scale. at the federal level. So I would not be surprised if we actually have more funding in the next fiscal year than we have in the past. And last is we issued a request for proposal to project-based vouchers, which means we take as a tenant-based voucher becomes available because someone leaves the program, then we can convert it to a project-based voucher, which then attaches it to a unit instead of being attached to a family. And that way we are able to increase the number of vouchers that are utilized in the city of Ann Arbor specifically, because the RFP is for housing in the city of Ann Arbor, whereas if we have tenant-based vouchers, tenants have to find a landlord willing to rent to them, and oftentimes that ends up not being in the city of Ann Arbor because of the market that we're facing here. And I believe that is my last slide.
Excellent.
Yes, it is.
Perfect. Thank you. We got Board Member Leetov and Councilmember Griswold.
Hey, I'm not sure if this question is for Jennifer or Tresna, but I'm curious about what the possible unit ranges are for the stadium and South Industrial sites.
The unit ranges, are you talking about the unit count or the unit mix, or what is specifically?
Unit count. So I know you were talking about duplexes on South Industrial, so it looked like it ranged from 8 to maybe a dozen or two, but I couldn't quite tell.
Yeah, so I can just go through, hang on, let me get my summary sheet. On Stadium Boulevard, hang on. We had, so that 4-story on Stadium, the 4-story kind of mega building there, that was 23 units. If we redevelop the existing building, we get 9 units, and then the duplex options, we would have 8 units.
Okay.
And then on the South Industrial site, the first option there, we had 30 units. That was what Jennifer had initially asked us for. And then the second option, which is one big building for the offices and the housing, we had 42 units. So that kind of represents a maximization of that site, and also kind of maxing out the light frame modular wood construction would be that. I mean, I think you can maybe get more, although parking does kind of start to limit things on that site.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Griswold.
Excellent presentation. And I just want to follow up on something that Councilmember Bannister asked regarding what size is optimal if you're providing support services. And I guess we have some experience with Miller Manor, where additional support services and security is needed. Are you seeing these units as being a higher socioeconomic population that would not need that much support?
Yeah, I think every site is different, and
Okay.
hasn't been, the final determination hasn't been made yet. And it's really going to depend on what the market is, what site plan gets approved. Ideally, I believe the smaller sites are better for supportive housing and having on-site supportive services. It could be maybe one site is also similar to Miller with 24/7 front door and services, but it doesn't have to be. We have a lot of supportive housing sites in the community between us and Avalon and Michigan Ability Partners that don't have, that kind of intensive services like at Miller Manor. And you can incorporate supportive housing into any project. It's just more challenging to have a mixture of incomes from very, very low to high-end market rate. And so we've actually been communicating with other experts and folks that do this kind of work like we're doing to see what works and what doesn't work. And we consistently hear the same message that having supportive housing for homeless households works better as a mixed income if it's also with other low-income households, maybe moderate income households. But when you start having high income, $1 million condos, that mixes better with a moderate income. So in the scale of incomes, having the very lowest and the very highest, we haven't found anywhere that model works. And so we're looking at each site, and we don't have any final decisions or any recommendations, because we could also have a senior site at one of these sites that would have support services as well.
Oh, okay, thanks. And I was trying to be realistic while being politically correct. And I really appreciate when communities are more integrated, and I believe that Green Baxter Public Housing is one of the best communities in the nation, and is a great example of what we can do. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councilman Lum.
Sorry, thanks. And I appreciate this update as well. And as always with Ms. Hall's presentations, they're informative and detailed, and thank you for that. In listening to this, clearly the affordable housing potential is significant, but one can't help, at least not this person, but wonder about parking, because we're eliminating hundreds of existing parking space and adding hundreds of new residents, and increasing demand and reducing the supply to a system that pre-pandemic was already at capacity sounds like an issue to me. I know we recognize that we expect fewer of the residents to own vehicles, but the number isn't zero. And we'll be losing hundreds of spaces. The DDA parking study presumably would be analyze the impacts, and I think that's critical. I just flipped back on the capital improvements expenditures, and this again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'm understanding that the study is not to be deferred, and wondering when that would be available, and if the study will be looking at both system-wide impacts and the impacts of the individual actions that are proposed.
I don't know if Susan's still on the call. She's more of the parking expert, but my understanding is it's a system-wide, and looking at the downtown area as the parking study, but not the area that's on campus, because that's not where any of our projects are going. So it's looking system-wide by kind of, you got the Carytown area and South Main area, and then you have, where the former Y is. So it's looking at those different areas. And some of the sites are more impactful than others on losing parking, and whether or not and how much we can incorporate. One of the questions that came up in one of our community engagement meetings was, well, could the affordable housing funding that we get, could that pay for parking? And the answer is yes, to a point, and it becomes private to the project as opposed to public to the community. So that's one of the things we're looking at. So for example, on Catherine, if the Housing Commission secured the funding to do a surface parking lot on Catherine, that's not very much of an additional expense to the project as an affordable housing project. We do parking lots all the time with our affordable housing, but then it becomes private parking. And so then we're weighing the benefits of adding parking that's not available to the public, where we're hearing that that's a site that really we want more public parking. And so that actually makes sense as a site that's not, that has housing on it that has fewer parking needs, as opposed to maybe the site on South Ashley, which is currently a large parking lot. And that's why our fundamental question is to the community, how much parking do we need? Is this an important site for parking? Because that is a big driver of how we design those buildings.
Thank you for that. I'm glad you spoke to 121 Catherine, because the option 3 had 90 underground spaces, and I was wondering if any of those would be made available to the public. I know that's an expensive option, but it sounds like you're considering other alternatives to that could be created to serve the Carytown and Farmers Market customers who park in that lot now. And similarly, it sounds like Klein's lot is low in the a low priority at this point in terms of redevelopment, potential redevelopment. But similarly, the consideration there, as you said, the key question is this parking lot critical for downtown? How critical is it? Whether or not the parking will be open to the public or if it would all be reserved for residents of the development. For 350 South Fifth, the Y lot, 353 South Main, neither of those proposals provide on-site parking. And I think, again, just going forward, you need to consider where the folks who live in these roughly, we're talking 500 units, where they would park. And then just lastly on Mr. Farrell's presentation, that the feasibility study was very detailed and interesting to read. And your associate touched on this, the modular multifamily development approach. You cited examples from Saline and Detroit. You seem to be came across as a strong advocate for this. And I know you mentioned the advantages of time and budget, and clearly it seems like, excuse me, a cost saver in terms of design. Just a little more information maybe on whether it's appropriate for which sites, in addition to was it industrial and
15
stadiums. Sorry, yeah, it would be interesting to hear more on that. Thanks.
I'll speak a little bit to it. Sorry to introduce the two different groups. Damian Farrell Design Group, I asked them to look at modular, and we talked about it. We were all very interested in it. I did not ask the Smith Group to look at modular, and so they haven't been looking at each other's sites. But it seems like there's three types of construction: steel frame for a taller building. You've got the concrete pedestal with wood stick built, or the modular that you could build on top of a pedestal and then all that, or you could do the modular, just straight up modular. And now I'll hand it over to Trezna or Damien to talk about the differences.
Thanks, Jane. You touched on it. It's something we as a firm have been very passionate about for a long time. We did our first modular project about 16 years ago. We did a series of adult foster care projects in small towns around Michigan. We had a client who was focused on that, and that got us into it. And we are doing this project in Saline now. It's been temporarily halted because of COVID and change in financing structure because the local bank got bought out by big bank, and so we're having to go back through that process again. But if you remember the Near North project, we had designed that to modular standards as well. That's really important to know. When we talk about modular, we're talking about exactly the same building codes as any other kind of construction. It's not to be mixed up with manufactured housing, where the building codes are a HUD-based code. So we're talking about standard codes. All it is, the construction happens in a factory under closed conditions and under weatherproof conditions. So, and it's very well suited to repetitive units and where you get like for instance, double loaded corridors where one box that's being built can be delivered up to 55 feet long. It can have a portion of one unit on one side, a portion of the hallway in the middle, portion of the other unit in the other. And that's where these economies of scale come into it. So from an appropriateness point of view, what you're really looking for is the ability to do as long a box as possible, if you will. And then you pick up your units by stacking them sideways. And it also enables you to be very modular about the arrangement of units as well. But it's we have found it to be a very green strategy because you can control a great deal. The speed is important, especially in projects like this, and the indoor air quality, the fact that it doesn't hit the rain, it doesn't get wet, and there are many other benefits to it as well. But yes, it is something we're very passionate about.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I guess I'll just perhaps close out and say, Ms. Hall and your team and Ms. Pillay and your team, thank you both so very much. These were outstanding presentations, outstanding, reflecting, so much effort on behalf of all of us. On the affordable housing side, I guess this is a very minor point. So much of the analysis that goes into the suitability of a particular design at a particular site depends upon the nature of the site, how we will be able to finance the site, how much we're going to have to put in, how much we can obtain through tax credits and the like. It would be, and maybe this is in the data set, Ms. Hall, that I haven't seen or didn't realize was there. As I think through what would be a good option with respect to a particular parcel, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and so forth, with all the subvariants, it would be useful to me if we could have a, city dollar per unit, city dollar per affordable unit measure. So where one particular option would require a heavy investment, one might require less investment, but still, what kind of bang for our buck are we getting?
Yeah, actually,
Is that in there?
We'll need to update it, but the financial feasibility analysis had different charts with each site with different scenarios. They aren't now exactly matching up with what we're presenting to the community, so we can update that information, but that kind of gives you a good idea on each site, different types of housing structures and mixtures of incomes, and it'll tell you what the per unit cost is for local subsidy. So for example, if you look at the ones for Platt and Stadium, it had a higher local per unit subsidy because it was hard to get tax credits versus a tax credit site. You can see that.
Perfect.
Which I'm happy, I'll email that to folks as well, so you can look at it.
You're the best. Councilmember Hayner, then let's wrap it up. Councilmember Hayner.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I just to follow up on what you said, I kind of agree that I think people want to get a sense of how far is our affordable housing dollar going to go into these projects. And I think that'd be really useful for us. And there's a notion, I mean, when you look at some of them, it looks like when they get into these mixing of the affordable component versus the open market component, the concern that we might be using these affordable housing and also the basically the donation essentially of the city property, to subsidize market rate development. And I'm not sure that that's good. If that's good or bad, I'd just like to know what those ratios are. I have an ongoing concern that we don't view affordable housing in our community as a percentage of all housing, but as a number of units that are needed based on your demand, which is obviously the way to know what the demand is. But I feel like if we're doing 288 units of market rate and 100 affordable, we've just set ourselves back in a percentage wise. And I think we'd see that the problem is worse than we realize it is if we started looking at it as a percentage of the whole. So I just want to throw that out there. And thanks for your presentation. And I want to thank this design group for coming in and speaking to the contextual uses in the neighborhood. I think it's interesting to see that. Certainly like at 1501, the notion is it's on a fronted street. It is a transit-oriented development type site. We could certainly go much bigger there. Is that something that was looked at, or are we sticking with the notion that because it's, it should be properly contextualized into that neighborhood?
I'll start by saying one of the things I should have added to the slide was we opened up our wait list in the entire month of August, and we had over 4,000 unduplicated applications for our wait list. That kind of gives you an idea of what the demand is out there. It doesn't tell you who everybody is, but that tells you just folks who heard about our open wait list and believe that they're eligible, basically. As far as Stadium, I'm not in any way an expert on this, but I've had 100 conversations with architects and engineers and planners. One of the challenges we keep coming up against is parking and open space requirements for each of the types of designs that we do. And so that is what ends up limiting, particularly not when you're not in the downtown, that is a particular limitation on a site like on Stadium, because there's not on-street parking on Stadium. The only parking within the neighborhood is that little teeny cut-through street. And so we looked at, could we go denser? Yes, with a PUD. Where the heck would people park if they needed parking, and what the impact would be on the neighborhood? And I'll let Damien, if you want to speak more to that, or Tresna, or any other architect. Michael, you're welcome to too.
That's basically exactly what I would have said, Jennifer. Is really parking seemed to drive a lot of the density, how much we could possibly get.
Because these are city properties under city use, don't we have do we have the ability to waive those requirements for ourselves?
So for the scheme where we proposed the 23 units on the Stadium site, we decided that would be a PUD, and we would request 1 car per unit. In the surrounding R1C neighborhood, I believe that the requirement is 2 cars. And a lot of the others, in all the other modular units that we proposed for that site, we were proposing an R4A zoning, which required 1.5 cars per unit. So, we would be, doing less parking by doing the PUD at 1 car per unit. But even that was the most we could get with just surface parking, and then what you have left on the site for the building footprint itself. It's just a really small site.
And parking is, so what we can do under zoning is one thing, what we can request under zoning is another, and then what the practical reality of the people who live there is the third piece, and how it interacts with the neighborhood. And I think I've said this before, but it's probably worth saying again. So in our sites where we have mostly single, very low income households, only about 20% maybe have cars of the people who live on our housing sites. But when we have our family sites, almost everybody has a car, and many people have 2 vehicles when they have, large families with a lot of people that are going in and out to work. And so it really also depends on, are you doing 1 bedroom and efficiencies, or are you trying to do family units on what the parking demand will be?
Board Member Letaw, then we'll close it up. Make it quick.
It's housing, so I can't promise. I appreciate the council member and mayor's requests for kind of the bang per buck, bang for buck per unit kind of metric that they're looking for. And that's consistent with kind of the request of some of our board members as well. I'm wondering, Jennifer, if there's a way, not necessarily in any of these documents, but as you're doing your reporting out, can you let us know, according to whether it's the 2017 survey or the 2015 housing and affordability report, like what % we are to those goals? Because that's part of what's guiding the work, right? Is the expectation of what it is we're trying to do. So can you help us understand as we go along, we're 4% closer, now we're 9% closer, that kind of thing?
Yep, absolutely.
Thanks.
So thank you. We now come to public comment general time. Public comment general time is an opportunity for members of the public to speak to council and the community about matters of municipal interest. To speak at public comment general time, one need not have signed up in advance. Speakers have, in order to speak at public comment general time, please dial the number on your screen, 877-853-5247. That is 877-853-5247. Once you're connected, please enter meeting ID 917-0089-7533. That is 917-0089-7533. Once you have been connected, please enter *9 to indicate that you wish to speak. The clerk will identify you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number when it is your turn to speak. When it is your turn to speak, you will have 3 minutes, so please pay close attention to the time. Our clerk will notify you when 30 seconds remaining and when your time is up. When your time is up, please conclude your remarks and cede the floor so that the next person may speak. Is there anyone who'd like to speak at public comment?
have one caller here.
Oh, hi, this is Michelle Hughes. And I just wanted to say I always get excited when I see these affordable housing proposals, and I would like to see the maximum number of units get built everywhere. And I would like to see, you know, I'm more excited when we see like retail or other type of use on the first floor rather than parking. So yeah, housing, yes. Parking, not so much. That's just about all I have to say. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.
No other callers.
If there are no other callers, we are adjourned. All right. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Everybody.
So much.